She was in one of the most brutal shows ever made. She survived wars, betrayals, and dragons. And Marvel almost put her in the underworld, leading a coven of witches to guide Thor through the afterlife. And nobody knew about it. Until now. Let's rewind to the summer of 2022. Thor, Love and Thunder dropped into theaters with the force of a lightning bolt and the chaos of, well, a Taika Waititi fever dream. And people had feelings about it. Strong ones. Some loved it, absolutely adored the color, the comedy, the goats, God, the screaming goats, and the sheer audacity of turning one of Marvel's most stoic heroes into a walking punchline with a heart of gold. Others? Not so much. Critics were split. Audience scores wobbled. Longtime MCU fans debated whether Waititi had gone too far this time. The same director who gave us the glorious madness of Thor, Ragnarok, had returned. But this time, some felt like the dial had been cranked past 11 and straight into absurdity. The film had its highs. Christian Bale as Gore the God Butcher was genuinely terrifying. Natalie Portman's return as Mighty Thor was surprisingly emotional. And Tessa Thompson as Valkyrie brought exactly the energy you'd want from a warrior queen trying to run a city full of eccentric aliens. But there were holes. Moments where the plot lurched forward like it was missing something. Transitions that felt jagged. Scenes that seemed like they belonged somewhere else, or had been cut before we ever got to see them. And it turns out they had. Because what didn't make it to the final cut of Thor, Love and Thunder, was something so wild, so unexpected, so completely unhinged in the best possible way, that when the actress involved finally started talking about it publicly, the internet quietly lost its mind. So let's talk about it. If you watch Game of Thrones, and let's be honest, most of the known world did, you know the show was a masterclass in taking extraordinary actors and putting them through absolute hell on screen. The actress we're talking about today is someone who knows a thing or two about surviving impossible circumstances, navigating power-hungry men, and carrying entire storylines on the strength of a single, devastating look. We're talking about Chris Van Houten, the Dutch actress who brought the Red Priestess Melisandre to life across 8 seasons of Game of Thrones. The woman in red. The one who gave birth to a shadow demon. The one who casually murdered a child with a leech. The one who, even in her character's most controversial moments, made you lean forward in your seat and wonder, what does she know that we don't? She's magnetic. She's theatrical. She commands the screen in a way that's almost supernatural. And Marvel saw that. They brought her in. They developed a concept around her. They were building something that, by the sound of it, would have been one of the most bizarre and memorable moments in the entire film. And then it didn't happen. But here's where it gets interesting. Because what they planned for her wasn't just a cameo. It wasn't a blink-and-you-miss-it background appearance. What they had in mind was conceptually insane in a way that fits perfectly with Waititi's chaotic creative energy. And yet somehow it still got cut. Okay, so let's set the scene. In Thor, Love and Thunder, there's a journey into eternity, that vast, cosmic realm at the edge of existence where Gore the God Butcher is headed with the kidnapped children of New Asgard. It's a visually stunning sequence. Black and white. Stark. Almost dreamlike. But the road getting there? In an earlier version of the story, it was supposed to be far stranger. According to what Chris Van Houten has revealed in interviews, she was cast to appear in the film as part of, and I need you to really hear this, a witch coven. Not one witch. A coven. A group of supernatural women, existing somewhere between the world of the living and the dead, who would appear to Thor during his journey through a kind of underworld or cosmic threshold. And their purpose? To guide him. To offer wisdom, prophecy, direction, in the way that ancient mystical figures always have in myth and legend. Now think about that for a second. Thor, the literal god of thunder, descendant of Odin, king of Asgard, being counseled by a coven of witches in the underworld. There's something almost Shakespearean about that. Something ancient and theatrical. It pulls from the same well as the 3 witches in Macbeth or the Fates in Greek mythology. And who better to lead that kind of coven than the woman who spent 8 seasons on television as the most eerily compelling mystic ever put on screen? Chris Van Houten as the head of a supernatural witch coven, guiding Thor through the underworld, in a Taika Waititi film. On paper, that is spectacular. But here's the thing, and this is the part that makes it truly a Taika Waititi production. It wasn't played straight. By all accounts, the scenes were not some solemn, moody, Lord of the Rings-style mystical encounter. This wasn't going to be dark and brooding. It wasn't going to be Melisandre 2.0 staring into flames and whispering prophecies. No. This was Taika's version of a witch coven, which, from everything described, leaned heavily into the absurd, the chaotic, the tonally unpredictable. The scenes apparently carried that signature Waititi energy where you're never quite sure whether to be awed or to burst out laughing, and somehow both reactions feel completely valid. Think about it. Ragnarok gave us a gladiatorial arena run by Jeff Goldblum, playing a hedonistic grandmaster. It gave us Korg, a soft-spoken rock creature who talks about revolution like he's narrating a nature documentary. It gave us Thor losing his hammer and having an existential crisis while Loki sipped wine and watched. Waititi's humor is specific. It's weird. It mixes the cosmic with the mundane in ways that shouldn't work, but absolutely do. So a witch coven scene in that universe wouldn't be traditionally spooky. It would probably be funny and strange, and somehow emotionally resonant all at the same time. There would likely be moments of genuine, mystical weight sandwiched between something completely ridiculous. And that's what makes the loss of it sting a little, because you can feel what it might have been. You can almost picture Chris Van Houten holding court in some surreal, otherworldly space, half oracle, half absurdist comedy bit, and Thor standing there completely overwhelmed, screaming goat somewhere in the distance that, oh, why didn't we get it? Honestly, the most likely answer is the most boring one: pacing. Thor, Love and Thunder already had a lot going on. Gor's storyline, Jane's cancer arc, Valkyrie's political struggles, Zeus, the Shadow Realm, the children, eternity, a romance rekindled, a villain redeemed, a death that actually meant something. That's a full movie. That's actually more than a full movie. And some critics would argue the film already felt overstuffed in places where it should have breathed and too breezy in places where it should have lingered. Inserting a full witch coven sequence in the middle of that, no matter how visually stunning or entertaining it might have been, could have thrown the pacing completely off the rails. The tonal balance is delicate in a Waititi film. Too much chaos and the emotional beats stop landing. Too much comedy and the dramatic weight evaporates. There's also the simple reality of runtime. Marvel films have a ceiling, a length that studios, theaters, and general audiences tend to prefer. When you're cutting for time, the scenes that don't directly move the central plot forward are always the first to go. A witch coven guiding Thor? Conceptually brilliant, tonally bold. But if it existed in its own bubble, if it didn't connect tightly enough to what came before and after, it becomes expendable. And so it was cut, quietly, without fanfare, like so many extraordinary ideas that never quite make it from the editing room to the screen. This isn't the first time something like this has happened in the MCU. Not even close. Marvel has a long and slightly heartbreaking history of extraordinary ideas that got cut, cameos that were filmed but never used, and alternate versions of beloved films that exist only in rumor and leaked concept art. Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness was supposed to have even more alternate universe variants. Avengers: Endgame had an entirely different vision for the Ancient One's role in the film. Spider-Man: No Way Home reportedly had sequences that were filmed and cut that would have significantly altered the emotional arc of the third act. And those are just the ones we know about. The MCU operates at a scale and speed that requires constant creative pivoting. Scripts change during production. Scenes get filmed that never make the cut. Actors show up on set for sequences that end up on a hard drive somewhere, never to be seen. Sometimes those deleted scenes leak. Sometimes they show up on Blu-ray extras. Sometimes they become the subject of interviews years later, when the actors finally feel comfortable enough to say, yeah, that was a thing, and here's what it was going to be. That's exactly what happened here. And the fact that we're only hearing about it now, through Chris Van Houten's own words, makes it feel somehow more real, more tantalizing, more lost, Now here's the question that's been sitting in the back of your mind since I started talking. Would fans have loved this or hated it? And honestly, both. Absolutely both. The MCU fandom is not a monolith. It never has been. For every person who wants Marvel to go weird and experimental and take creative risks, to push into genuinely strange territory and trust audiences to come with them, there's another person who wants consistency, coherence, and emotional weight over stylistic chaos. The people who loved Ragnarok would have adored this. They would have clipped that witch coven scene and made it their profile picture. Chris Van Houten as a mystical guide in a Taika Waititi underworld? That's the kind of content that lives rent-free in a fandom's collective imagination for years. But the people who already felt like Love and Thunder went too far into comedy territory, they would have pointed to those scenes as proof that the film lost the plot, that it prioritized spectacle and strange humor over the grounded emotional storytelling that made earlier Thor films resonate. Both reactions would be valid, and both would be loud. There's something beautiful about that, actually. The idea that a single deleted sequence could split an entire fandom down the middle. Not because it's offensive or wrong, but because it perfectly encapsulates the great debate at the heart of modern Marvel. How weird is too weird? How far can you push a superhero story before it stops feeling like one? Here's the bigger picture, though. We are living through Marvel's most experimental phase since the studio first took a gamble on a talking raccoon and a sentient tree back in 2014. The MCU today looks nothing like it did in Phase 1. It's stranger, bolder, more willing to fail interestingly than succeed safely. Eternals was a 3-hour art film. Moon Knight went full psychological horror. Ms. Marvel played with animation. What if, threw every rule out the window, and Thor, Love and Thunder, for all its flaws, was a piece of that experiment. A film that asked whether a superhero story could look like a Lisa Frank notebook fever dream and still make you cry at the end. The Witch Coven wasn't some random idea. It was a symptom of that experimentation. It was Taika reaching into mythology, into fantasy, into absurdist comedy, and trying to pull something genuinely new out of a character who's been on screen for over a decade. The fact that it didn't make it to the final cut doesn't mean the instinct was wrong. It just means the execution, in context, wasn't quite right. And that matters, because experimentation sometimes fails. But the willingness to experiment, to cast Chris Van Houten as the head of an otherworldly witch coven and see what happens, is exactly what keeps a franchise from going completely stale. So here's where we land. Somewhere in a Marvel editing suite, on a hard drive, in a server room, in some folder marked deleted/unused, there's footage of Chris Van Houten leading a coven of witches through an underworld sequence in a Thor film that almost nobody knew existed. We may never see it. Marvel may never release it. It may stay lost in that particular vault forever, alongside all the other extraordinary things that almost made it into the films we love. But now you know it existed. And that's the strange magic of deleted scenes, isn't it? The moment you find out about something that was planned, filmed, developed, and then stripped away, you feel the absence of it differently. The film you watched becomes a shadow of a larger film you never got to see. Thor, Love and Thunder, with all its glorious, chaotic, divisive energy, was already a film about excess and emotion and cosmic absurdity. Imagine it with Melisandre leading the dead. Imagine what that film could have been. And the next time you watch Love and Thunder, and you hit that stretch in the middle where something feels like it's missing, maybe now you'll know exactly what that something was.